The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
All right, general managers, put your pencils down. You should have your roster submitted for the Four Nations tournament. All of us regular people will know by Wednesday who will represent Team Canada, Team USA, Team Finland, and Team Sweden at the tournament in February. CJ, what are you hearing about these rosters? You can pick whichever one you want, but just whatever juicy tidbit you could tell us about these teams that will be, again, unveiled on Wednesday.
Well, probably a few housekeeping notes of note. You know, the rosters do get announced on Wednesday, but, you know, with the long lead time up to February 12th when the tournament gets going, you know, I think that there's a pretty good understanding or expectation, unfortunately, that some of the players named Wednesday will not be in a position to participate when the Four Nations face-off gets going. And so, you know, basically there can be injury fill-ins or replacements made between now and February 12th. So, you know, while these rosters are going in and the honor goes to the players getting selected, I do think that what we see in the tournament itself will be a little bit different. And, you know, at this point, you know, it's fair to say there's some disappointment, I'd say, from some of the countries that they had to be limited to 23 players, because once the tournament starts, you can't make injury replacements. And so each of these teams will just be carrying in one extra forward compared to what you usually see in an NHL game, 13, one extra defenseman with 7D and one extra goaltender. But, you know, again, injuries are part of the sport. And then there's a possibility that we could see one of these teams playing shorthanded. So, you know, I don't know how much of the rosters will leak out between now and Wednesday night. At least nighttime in North America is when the Canadian and U.S. rosters are announced that afternoon. North American time, Sweden and Finnish rosters will come out. But, you know, it's exciting to finally have this back on the docket, I'd say.
Do you have a mock-up of Team Canada? This is not me trying to surprise you with a pop quiz or anything. I just know your brain enough that you've definitely thought about it at least once.
Yeah, a few times. I mean, I don't have the final roster in my hand. You know, I've been sort of told from people that know where this is going that we should expect some surprises. We should expect some names that you probably see on most of the sort of media projections, we'll call it, that us and our colleagues have done in recent months, that some names on those rosters will not appear on the final Team Canada roster. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't expect, for example, Connor Bedard to be on the team. At least not in the initial roster naming. You know, certainly think that you're going to see some bottom players among the forward group that are, you know, bring a little bit different element than just, you know, high scoring punch. So, you know, I think you have to keep in mind that these aren't all-star teams. You know, you've seen whether it's Bill Guerin or Don Sweeney, who's responsible for the Canadian roster, interviewed. I mean, they're gonna note that pretty prominently because, you know, there's going to be players in the midst of great seasons that aren't going to be selected in this initial wave. And, you know, for what I mentioned at the top, this is kind of, I don't know if it's awkward. It could be awkward that, you know, some players will be told they didn't make it, and then ultimately, a good chance the GM's going back to one or more of those players between now and February and saying, "Oops, actually, you're on the team." And so, you know, I think an important part of the process right now is the calls with the players not initially selected, because, you know, some of those players will essentially be on some version of standby, or they'll have an understanding they may be the next man up or pretty close to the next man up in the case of injuries. And so, you know, it's kind of just awkward the way it works. I mean, I don't know that there's a better way to do it. You might say, well, they should just announce it 2 weeks before the tournament, but, you know, obviously players have lives and there's a planning aspect to this. You know, the players that aren't participating in the Four Nations face-off get a nice break in the season come February, longer than a typical all-star break because of the length of the tournament. So, you know, it's balancing all those needs and things. And, you know, let's face it, you could do it 2 weeks before the tournament. Maybe someone gets injured the last game and you're still going to have changes. So, you know, let's see. It's kind of an interesting few days. I wish they didn't have this leg. I just think it creates the possibility that this gets a little messy or some players' names get out. I mean, obviously it's hard to keep this under wraps. I mean, once players know they're on, their agents know they're on, their families know they're on, some of their teammates might know they're on, and then some people in our position are going to know some of them are on. But as of this moment, I don't have the rosters in front of me or anything like that.
The way you're describing it, you seem like you're scared of this turning into like a Frank Saravalli situation where just everything just gets leaked out before everyone knows, like what happened with the expansion draft once upon a time.
Yeah, I'm not scared of it. I just think it's very likely. I mean, I'm not saying all the rosters will get out, but I would think certain players' names will get out. I mean, I don't understand in the late stages of 2024 why anyone would think you could build this kind of lag into when the rosters are due and when the announcement gets made that it's going to remain intact. But, it's not my desire to go around and figure it out and ruin the announcement surprise or anything like that. But it's almost, it becomes like a bit of a zero-sum game. I mean, if you're not doing it, someone else is going to do it, then you're just, basically, confirming their reports. It's an awkward couple days is the best way to put it, for how this is going to go. And, I don't really know what to expect exactly, but I do think you're going to start to hear some of the names. We're recording Monday morning. The rosters aren't officially in yet, but at some point today, each of the 4 teams will formally have submitted their rosters to the NHL and the NHL Players Association. And then from that point on, those choices are locked in. Those players will be informed. And as I said, I think some degree of intel or information is going to leak out into the public forum.
By the time this episode comes out, I'm sure some rosters will have been submitted by then. Just thinking for the intro I just did. Can you give us a name at least? Can you give us a name, whether it's for Canada, whether it's for some other roster that is getting a lot of buzz? You don't have to say they're on the roster, but just give us a name. Give us a name that people might not have initially thought for, maybe for Team Canada, maybe for another roster that's getting a lot of consideration. Give us a name.
Well, the one that jumps out for me is Tom Wilson for Team Canada. It's kind of reminds me a little of what the environment was around Brad Marchand many years ago, where, Marchand early in his career was known for a lot of the, for getting suspended, quite frankly, for crossing the line, for being a shift disturber out there. And, nice. There was once this idea, like, can you imagine that this guy would be on Team Canada at something like the World Cup of Hockey, which he was in 2016. He played with Sidney Crosby there. Obviously, fast forward to now, he was one of the 6 players already named to the Canadian roster. So no one bats an eye at this point because he's been seen in that light in the past. But I think, there certainly seemed to be a fair bit of support for Tom Wilson. So he's someone who I think could get on the Canadian roster. And it is almost, for some of the same reasons. I mean, a lot of his career has been known for, the times he's crossed the line. He certainly had a window of time there. I'm going back a few years where he was suspended pretty frequently in a small period of time. And, maybe just wasn't always thought of as someone who would be in the mix for a team like this. But it seems like he's at least got a good chance to be there. Travis Sanheim's another name that if we had done this exercise in August, pick your Team Canada, I don't think I would have. It wouldn't initially be jumping to the top 7 names on the Canadian depth chart, but it sounds like he's put on a pretty strong push to make this team, and wouldn't be the least bit surprised now that we're here on the roster submission day that if he ends up getting there for Canada. I mean, let's face it, some of the surprises will be the players that don't make it. I mean, that it's kind of the weird thing. I think it bothers the people that have to make the decisions that, they pick a team, and then the first article that comes out or the first tweet from someone like you or I is going to say this player didn't make it. It's kind of been in the cards a bit, but it sounds like Cole Caulfield, even with the great start he's had to the season, is unlikely to make the initial U.S. roster out of the gate. Heard some talk, even someone like Tage Thompson from Buffalo might not make that U.S. roster. And so, the similar thing goes, someone's going to be left off for Team Canada. And I don't know who the names are. And at the risk of radioing myself, I'm not going to list off, but there's a group of players that include the likes of, say, Mark Scheifele, who's had such a great season in Winnipeg, who I'm not saying isn't on the roster, but would certainly be among the bubble players, I think, when you work through those decisions. And so, you just wonder how that goes. And then, as I say, we might make a big deal of it on Wednesday this week, and then some or multiple of these players might end up getting there. So, I mean, it's just nice to have this discussion again. It's nice to have this to focus on. And I got to say, I'm pretty excited for the tournament. I know it's a new concept. It's not the same as the Olympics. We can put all the qualifiers out there, but you're about to have a tournament where you see all the best players in the world, or most of them, playing for their countries, playing against each other. It's just a little appetizer for a pretty delicious Olympic tournament to come in 2026.
I just want this tournament to be fun. I just want it to be something that will continue to mount up our appetites for more best on best. We are both fans, you and I, CJ, of best on best hockey. And I get there may be some people who look at this tournament and say, it's not the real thing. I'm okay with it having that step below the Olympics. It's just something at this point. Plus, I'd much rather that.
Let's face it. I think the average person is going to prefer to average hockey fan is going to prefer to watch this than an all-star game. So, yeah. I mean, essentially that's what it's replacing, right? Is we don't have an all-star weekend in this NHL season. And so, this stretches over 10 or 12 days, whatever it is, but and it's 7 games total. I mean, it's not that crazy, but it's a cool event in that if you wanted to, you can physically watch all 7 games. They don't go head to head. And you're going to see Canada play the US. You're going to see each of the teams play each other, because it's just a 4-team tournament. So I think, if you're a Swede, you get to see Finland. It's going to be cool. I think it's the reintroduction that's needed. I'm not going to sit here and argue that it holds historical significance, but I do think it's obviously an honor for any player that gets selected to represent his or her country. And, you're going to get to do that at this tournament. And obviously a lot of people want to, of the players selected, there's going to be a pressure to perform or to find a fit with a line, because you want that in the minds of the decision makers a year from now, when I'm sure we'll be back doing this show next December at some point with a little bit more urgency around the decisions, because you're talking about the Olympics. Then we will have seen the 4 nations. Like I just think everyone's mind's going to get back on this, and the same 23, all 23 players picked for their countries won't necessarily be part of the 25 that go to the Olympics in a year's time. And so there's competition there. And so if someone, for example, like Connor Bedard doesn't end up making the 4 nations team, you just consider it a little bit more motivation for him to try to change that decision a year from now.
Anything else you want to mention about 4 nations? We'll be sure to break down these rosters as best as we can on our next episode.
No, that's good for now. I mean, it's kind of this awkward period where we know the rosters are being finalized, but we don't have them in our hands.
All right, let's talk about the big trade that happened over the weekend. David Jiricek going from Columbus to Minnesota, along with a 2025 5th-round pick. Going to Columbus, a conditional 1st-round pick in 2025, a 2026 3rd-round, and a 4th-round pick, 2027 2nd-round pick, and Damon Hunt in exchange. That's a pretty big trade for a young defenseman.
It is. And if you look at, some of those draft pick value charts out there, essentially, some people, including the Perry model is one of the more famous ones, but they basically assign a certain value to each pick in the draft. And if you look at the expected value of that return, it basically equals something close to a 6th overall pick, which is what David Jiricek was in the very recent past in 2022. And so obviously you just don't get players that are just on the verge of their 21st birthday, that are 6'4", that shoot right-handed, that, he has some limited NHL experience. He's been playing the American Hockey League. I mean, getting that player is going to cost you something. I mean, even for some of the concerns out there, maybe if like you're the Blue Jackets and you look at his skating and you have some wonders if that's going to limit, how impactful he's going to be as an NHL player. I mean, he's clearly a pretty valued asset. And ultimately, with a few teams knocking at the door, I think Columbus was able to extract a little bit more out of Minnesota in this deal than some might have guessed heading into it. And whether or not it works out, I mean, we're going to have to wait so long to really judge a trade like this one, because, it hinges, first of all, on what Jiricek becomes as a player. And, Minnesota's clearly taking the long view here. We'll probably see him play games for the Wild this season, but he's starting in Iowa with their AHL team. They're going to get their skating consultant to work with him, obviously, get him comfortable in the system, and then, try to develop him into what he could be. I mean, could be a 2nd pairing defender, maybe even a 1st pairing defender if he takes the right steps. I mean, he's so young, it's hard to say. And then obviously all those draft picks for Columbus just represent magic beans at this point. I mean, you're obviously happy to get a 1st-round pick. I mean, Minnesota's having a nice season. The condition on that is it was top 5 protected, which, I'd say based on Minnesota's start, pretty sure their 2025 first rounder won't be in the top 5 picks of the draft, so it's likely going to be transferred to Columbus this year, but it could be somewhere in the 20s, could be in the 30s. Maybe Minnesota goes and wins the Stanley Cup and it's a 32nd overall pick. And then you get a second, a third, or a fourth as well, over the coming years, as you outlined. So, I think it's a fair trade, and, on paper, you can understand how they got there. As I say, if you use that draft pick value, it kind of points to how they got to that exact, collection of picks back in return. And, I think if you're the Wild, what you like about it, there's a little more certainty when you're getting a player. I mean, you never know what each player or any player will become, but, it's not just an idea. It's not just, a pick, that you're going to make in a few years' time, and you have it could be 5 years. That 2027 second rounder. So that's going to be what? Someone born in 2009.
Oh my God.
Will be picked with that pick, or maybe I think 2009, 2010, whatever. Jeez. And that player in the second round, that pick could be 53, just to pick a random number. Like, it might be 5 years beyond that when that player is ready to really be an impactful NHL player. I mean, just based on what we see. So, I see why Columbus decided they're moving on. It was time to do it. They acted pretty quickly here, once they focused that they were going to make this trade. I think that's probably best for everyone involved. Once the writing's on the wall that the relationship's ending, you should probably, end the relationship, which is what they did. But I mean, a lot of what they got here, I mean, who's to say? You and I might be beyond our media days when that player has done his career down the line, whoever's picked with that.
I mean, that's what, 2031, 2032? I hope I'm still working somewhere.
Yeah, but then the career might go 17 years. It might be like 2048 when that player retires from the NHL. So
2024, that's 24 years. 50, I'd be 54. I mean, you might be retired. I might still be working.
Right. I'm just being, I hadn't done the math. I was just being glib that, to measure what that, that's a trade tree for the next Steve Dangle, not this one, is all I'm saying. It's going to, before you can break that down. But look, it's a significant deal, and it's a deal made in season. I mean, we always talk about trades. I think fans like trades. I think it helps drive discussion. I think it's good during the regular season to, it breaks up where we're not just breaking down the game that was played last night, for example. But, we've seen a lot of movement already this year. This is by far the most significant trade and may be the biggest trade in a sense. I'm not saying, it's a longer term one, but it's not the kind of deal you usually see in season, quite frankly. I mean, usually teams are assessing, their needs of the moment and making those trades. Or obviously some teams are buyers and sellers right before the trade deadline, and you can understand how you get to certain things. But, there's a long-term risk on both sides of this one, and you're going to have to wait a long time before we determine who won it.
So what about the teams who lost out on David Jiricek? We heard reports of teams like Pittsburgh and Montreal possibly being in on him. What do they do now?
Well, I think unfortunately it's not a straight pivot because, as I say, it was a rare asset to be able to get a chance to trade for during the year. And so there's not another recent 6th overall pick who's a large defenseman who shoots right, which were all, very positive attributes or qualities for a player to have that are available somewhere else. I mean, I think for Pittsburgh specifically, they're just going to keep getting involved in everything they can get involved with that does see younger players, switching teams. The Penguins are clearly trying to, retool on the fly, whatever we call it. I think they're aggressive though. I mean, that's a team that's trying to make something happen. I think I might have mentioned it on the last show, but Kyle Dubas isn't just sitting around waiting for March 7th to come around the trade deadline and then trading off a few UFAs. I think that they're out there a little bit more aggressively looking for players that could be of interest, that might fit a certain profile. I mean, you might have noticed Philip Tomasino, who they got last week from Nashville, scored a goal since coming over to the Penguins.
Scored 2 at least. He scored at least 2, I think. There
you go. Pittsburgh, they've been linked to even the likes of Niels Höglander if Vancouver gets, exhausted there. And I think, the link really just comes down to the fact that Penguins are exploring what they can do with younger players, specifically. And so, there's not one other, there's not a Jiricek 2.0 out there is all I'm saying in this moment. And so it's not as simple as saying, those teams missed out on him. Now they pivot to another player. But I think, you want to keep looking around the marketplace. And, the snow hasn't even flown in all the NHL markets that expect snow. And we've already seen, 5 or 6 trades this season. And I have no reason to think we're not going to see, more. I mean, the trade freeze doesn't kick in until December 20th. So we still got 2.5 weeks here before that happens.
Okay, so there's no David Jiricek available, but there is a Jacob Trouba available.
Not the same thing, right? I mean,
I know, but still, look, there's pieces out there available for trade.
Right, but the teams trading for a Trouba, I would think are trying to win today. Minnesota is trying to win today too. So I guess I'm about to shoot my own argument in its own foot. But they're making that trade not for this season, right? That's a longer term, dreaming of a world beyond Jared Spurgeon's career, or they're envisioning that being, Faber on the right for many years to come, and then maybe second pairing Jiricek on behind him in the slotting. So, it's a very unique trade, I guess, is all I'm trying to hammer home. Whereas, even Trouba, for all kinds of reasons, the fact that, half the league is on his no trade list, that there's a big contract involved there, and the type of team that would trade for him, has different objectives in mind. And let's face it, most of the teams trying to win this season don't have cap space to make significant moves just yet. I mean, that's why so much gets clustered close to the deadline. And so, the Rangers one made the headlines just because they announced that those players were available. Didn't necessarily signify that those moves are imminent. And in fact, it doesn't sound like they are, but, it's been a tough week in New York. They did get a win over the weekend, but, after all the trade bluster and the headlines of last week, the team didn't exactly respond in a way, I'm sure management or the coaching staff would have liked.
Yeah, it's still just really fascinating to see that team have as good of a record as they look. And I get it. Like, it's not everything, but clearly this team has Stanley Cup aspirations with the roster that they have. But still, like, there are teams in much worse positions than the New York Rangers, who very much are crying afoul of their years. And the Rangers are still where they're at, but they obviously want more. It's really fascinating to see that situation from a distance.
Well, look, they had a team that won the President's Trophy last year, got to the Eastern Conference Finals. So, like, they've had a team that's been almost as close as you can be to winning a cup without winning it. I mean, I know they haven't played in the final with this group, but they've been an elite team in the league. And so they have a pretty high internal bar. And, that internal bar isn't just, getting a wild card position and, playing some playoff games. They're trying to win it all. And I think that they sense that something isn't quite right with the group, and that maybe they're not even at the level they were last year. And that level wasn't quite good enough to take them all the way to the final and have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And so, it's probably a similar feeling right now in Edmonton, quite honestly. I'm not saying they're trading away all these pieces or putting out, big notes, but they've been so close in the past that they know what level almost got the job done, and they haven't been to that level yet this year. And so, there's room for some patience, but patience runs pretty thin, especially once you get into December, which is where we are now. I mean, the season, it feels long in real time, but it does pass pretty quickly. And, I think in New York, you've also got an owner in Jim Dolan, who's known for being very demanding of the people who work for him. It hasn't been a comfortable start to the year, and they had a tough November. And so, let's see where that leads them. There's lots of names on the trade board or on the next trade board that isn't yet completed that'll be with New York Rangers ties. But, at the same time, I don't think they're going to trade away half the roster either. It's about trying to find the right moves that could, shock the system, get them playing better. And, the Trouba move, to me, it feels like one that's more likely to happen in the summer. It's not to say it can't happen during the season, but I think given, the fact that he does have some trade protection, that they might need to work with him on where he ends up, that he's got a, family situation that's known publicly with his wife, in the final stages of training to be a doctor. Usually with a veteran player like that, it was a family and a lot of things going on, and also has the ability to some degree to control what happens. Usually those situations play out not when you're playing every other night in the middle of the year, but somewhere in the summertime.
Do you get the sense that a Chris Kreider trade, if the Rangers still want to entertain that, would be a summer move as well?
I don't know. I don't have as good a feel for that one. I mean, the difference with Kreider and Trouba is that they tried to trade Trouba in the summer previous. So,
yes, they did.
This has been, we'll call it an ongoing situation and discussion. So, I think there's a world where Chris Kreider never gets traded. I mean, to be honest, I expect him to be on Team USA as an example for the Four Nations tournament. He's still a pretty effective player. I know his numbers are up this year from where they've been. And I understand his birthday is what it is. He's getting older, but his cap hit's still pretty manageable. It's not to say they can't trade him, but I think they'd have to get a pretty appealing package back. Whereas with Trouba, it might just be time, or beginning to be time. And so, generally speaking, it's easier to make those deals in the summer. I mean, there's no way around that fact. And especially if the cap ends up having a big significant jump for next year, there's just going to be more money in the system for teams to do lots of things, including perhaps making some big trades. So, that's something to look forward to in the summertime. A little bit more freedom to move for GMs, but the Rangers will continue to be a team that we're monitoring, just because it feels like it's like a Coke bottle that's being shaken around there, right? Like there's a lot of pressure building up internally, and at some point there might need to be a release.
Yeah, for people who remember the YouTube video, the early YouTube era of the Coke Mentos, I'm very much rooting for something like that. Yes,
I remember that even somehow.
Yes, that's true. What do you think about what's going on in Nashville? They did make a trade over the weekend with Colorado, swapping goaltenders, Scott Wedgwood and Justus Anunen, changing addresses. But also, we were talking about in the group chat with Steven Stamkos after a recent game, not happy with how things are going. The Predators near the bottom of the standings, couldn't have gone worse considering what their offseason was like. What do you think of what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been surprising to some degree to see it go on this long. I mean, you don't want to pronounce a team's playoff hopes completely dead at this point, but it's hard to see the path back for them. I mean, they'd have to have a really impressive second half to get into it. And when you're the quote unquote winner on July 1st, when you're splashing around the kind of money they did to get Brady Shea and Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault. I mean, Marchessault has had a really, really tough start there, production wise, after, enjoying a really long run of success in Vegas. I mean, look, he wouldn't be the first player that's changed teams and has maybe struggled to find his place, struggled to find the fit. When it doesn't go well early, I think it would only be natural for anyone when you're trying to impress people at a new job that like the pressure mounts internally on yourself. But yeah, I wouldn't have predicted it'd be as close to the bottom of the standings as they are. And then that's going to lead to frustration, right? I mean, Stamkos knows he's only got X number of years left in his career. He's been part of so many great teams over so many years. He knows what a great team looks and feels like. And he's looking around the room right now and he knows that that's not a great team. I mean, they just have consistently not really ever got on a roll this year. I mean, obviously they've won some games, but you just feel like Nashville has never found its footing. It's not like they won 4 in a row and then lost 5. Like it just feels like they haven't really found their best selves. And so, it's been interesting because Barry Trotz is still a relatively new GM, obviously had a long history in the league as a head coach. He's made a bunch of trades. They've been, say, of the smaller variety, and also put Dante Fabro on waivers, lost him to Columbus earlier in the year. Like he hasn't been sitting idly by. And it certainly feels like there could be more moves to come, I think, in Nashville. I mean, that's the only way for me to, you can't just like ride this out. You know what I mean? I think that he has to keep pushing some buttons, believe the Predators would be sort of similar to Pittsburgh in the sense that wouldn't mind maybe introducing some younger players to the roster, but guys who are ready to play if they can find, players that fit that mold. And, I like the deal they made in a narrow window with Colorado because, Annanen's 8 years younger than the goaltender they sent out, and Scott Wedgwood. They also get, a late round draft pick, but they still added the pick. They're adding upside at the position over time, and they're adding a pick. So, I mean, I don't think they're into full scale, pull it down, trade everything off the roster. But, what'll be interesting is if things don't turn around, is if they start to become more of a seller as the deadline gets closer. Do they, a lot of their veteran players have term left on their contract. One exception is Gustav Nyquist is a pending UFA in Nashville, and one coming off of a tremendous season last year. might have flown under the radar elsewhere, but, had over 70 points last season, was a top line winger for that team, and that team made to the playoffs. He could be a pretty attractive free agent, piece for a team to add if they sell. But do they end up looking at players like Ryan O'Reilly or some other veterans that have term left on their contract that they don't have to necessarily trade? But that's going to be some of the big questions I'm looking to see answered in Nashville, and I don't think they have those answers themselves just yet. I mean, they're not of a mind where they want to tear it down to the studs, but obviously Barry Trotz, I think, has an open mind in terms of we've seen him both trade a younger player like Tomasino, but then also make a deal where he trades Wedgwood and gets the younger goaltending and Juice Stanin in. So, they're a hybrid team in that they're not trying to achieve one thing with the trades in the movement. They're kind of doing multiple things at the same time. And I think that makes them a pretty big wild card as we look ahead to the next few months and, the roster moves that could come.
Any other team stands out to you in that little cluster of, hey, are they getting a little antsy maybe to make a move? I mean, Boston we focused on a little bit before. Ottawa right now, they're, last week they put Artem Zub on LTIR. They could still use a defenseman. There was a report out from Darren Dreger that maybe the Calgary Flames could be aggressive ahead of the deadline. Is there any other team that stands out?
Yeah, all those teams you mentioned, they're kind of looking for specific things, right? Calgary's looking for a top six center. Ottawa's looking for a defenseman. And so, obviously at any given moment, they could find those players and pull the trigger. But, when you're looking for specific things, sometimes it's harder to do. I think the teams that it's harder to predict is, like I'm saying, at Pittsburgh, where they're looking to do a bunch of things. And so the odds of something falling into place is higher. I'd put Nashville on that list. Boston, I think they're going to let things settle down there, since the coaching change, see where the team's at before any other big decisions are going to come. I don't think they have to do anything in the near term. But once you get through 15, 20 games with Joe Sacco running the show, you're going to have a feel for what the team is this season. And then I think that's going to set the priorities for management as they look ahead to the trade deadline. No one fresh in mind. I mean, it's a year though. There's a lot in the air. I do think that, I'm just trying to go through my brain here, but no, I don't see as much on the horizon that has to happen right now, but certainly just the number of teams out there looking around is, that leads us to the possibility that, we're going to see a little bit more action here coming up.
You ready to have some fun with these Ask CJ questions?
Of course. Bring the heat, brother.
I was about to say, before this show started, CJ seemed pretty excited for more Ask CJ questions. And normally we get through a bunch, but like you seemed like you were ready for the Ask CJ segment today.
Always. I like knowing what's on people's minds. And in your own brain, you get sometimes stuck in a one-track mind. You're thinking of certain things. You're talking to certain people. And then, the fans out there have a different perspective. So I think it's good to have basically we're what are we doing? We're sort of like crowdsourcing our show a little bit. And ultimately we want to be talking about the things you want to hear about. So let her rip.
So sometimes we get hockey questions that ask about, hey, is my team good? Or, hey, is this team likely going to make a trade? And sometimes you get questions like this one from Lacey Gracie. What's the best way to eat cranberry sauce?
I think the best way to eat it is to pass it down to the person next to you at the dinner table and not take any when you're at the family dinner.
You really don't like cranberry sauce? What is with the hate for cranberry sauce?
I didn't say I hate it.
Bad.
I just pass on it.
You don't rock with it?
No. In fact, I was at sort of a holiday party over the weekend and they served, some of the food that you would typically associate with the holidays, like turkey and mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce was there. And I went right on by. Put some gravy on my potatoes and turkey, but I did not put any cranberry sauce on.
Like I don't think you need to put cranberry sauce on like turkey or whatever, but like I like it. I don't mind it as a concept. I think it's fine. You can just put it on the side somewhere, like just eat it. Like I don't understand the hate for cranberry sauce. I don't understand why people are throwing it in the trash as if it's something. It's fine. It
feels like fine. Dessert with dinner. That's my issue.
I mean, you don't rock with dessert with dinner? It's like a fun thing to have every once in a while.
I guess dessert after dinner, but I don't usually have it on the same plate with my dinner.
Okay, well, we can add that to our list of disagreements.
So my answer is just pass it on to your aunt next to you or whatever, and just pass that on by.
Bruh. All right. Elliot Coates. I can't believe you this cranberry sauce BS. I will not stand for this BS agenda for cranberry sauce.
I've passed up on cranberry sauce within the last 48 hours. That's how.
Yeah.
This is a fresh take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very fresh. Mm-hmm. Elliot Coates. Who's cooked? Boston, Colorado, New York Rangers. Who's on the come up? Philly, Buffalo. How much are we overreacting?
Whew. I don't know if any of those teams are cooked. Like the team I believe in the least out of the three offered there that are expected to be good is probably the Bruins. I think that there's really some cracks in the foundation that have shown through. You know, it's not just the win-loss record. A lot of the stuff under the hood hasn't looked good there this year. They've struggled with their specialty teams. It's just a lot would have to get put back on the tracks to have them be like a cup contender again. Maybe I'm wrong though. But that's of the Rangers, Colorado. I mean, we didn't even talk their end of that trade, but they just went and got Scott Wedgwood. You know, which I'm not saying is the answer, but it's a sign that really, if you look at the injuries that team has had and the goaltending it's had, I mean, that explains to me why they are where they are in the standings. I still think they're a top team and it's obviously an if they can get everyone healthy, if they can get rolling, if they can start getting saves at a level needed to compete in a playoff series against other tough opponent. You know, I think Colorado still has a spot among the cup contenders. You know, the Rangers have certainly not been there in the last 2 weeks, but you know, I look at them with quality players at every position, fewer holes. You know, I think of the three teams, Boston would be the one that concerns me the most. Who's on the come up?
Philly, Buffalo were the two teams Elliot mentioned. I presume you're not limited to those two.
I'd say Buffalo because it's sort of it's like the ancillary Buffalo or Ottawa. It's sort of the ancillary of the other question. I just think because Boston isn't what it once was, that there's opportunity in the Atlantic Division. You know, it's still pretty tightly compressed. If you look at things there, I'll commit to Buffalo, but you can tell I'm not fully sold myself. You know, but one of Buffalo, Ottawa, or Detroit has got to get playing well and win some games and make this interesting and get into the playoffs. I mean, I feel like it's sitting right there as a possibility for someone.
For sure. From Boop Master Ben, bottom three Christmas holiday songs. Here's mine. Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney, Blue Christmas by Elvis Presley, and the Chipmunk song, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Bottom three. You've been asked before for your favorite. Boop Master Ben is asking for the opposite.
I can't give him that because I love the Christmas song so much. I can't even bring myself to say any are bottom three. Like, I am already currently giving the Spotify Christmas hits playlist like massive run in my house. So there's almost no Christmas song I don't like. I love Christmas, man. I'm on the record. I see all these people. They're like, "Oh, U.S. Thanksgiving's out of the way. Now I can get my tree." I'm like, man, my tree's already like got grandkids.
Yeah, yours been up. Your tree's been up.
My tree's already started a family and is like, you know, like it's part of the house. So I can't do it. There's no bad Christmas songs. I love Christmas.
Producer Nick is trying to chime into the debate. Christmas Shoes is the worst Christmas song I've never heard. I don't know if can we get some kind of like vibe? I don't know what that song is.
I was gonna say we can't play it. I don't know what it is either by his reference, but maybe I will when I hear it.
Yeah, I mean, if producer Nick would feel so kind, now would be the time for him to turn his mic on and like sing us Christmas Shoes. If he wants to. He says it's a sad song, so I feel bad, but it doesn't give me Christmas cheer. All right, you don't need to make us sad. I know for me, I'm not a massive Christmas music guy, but I'm looking back here at I don't know if it's in my shot at all, but I'm probably going to play a lot of the Vince Guaraldi trio, the Charlie Christmas Brown Christmas vinyl. Love music from Charlie Brown Christmas, so I'll probably play that a lot when it gets closer to Christmas time. Anyway, Tyler, who chews more gum per 60 minutes, Craig Berube or Chris Tanev?
Craig Berube, I think.
Nice.
I mean, Chris Tanev has to go out there and exert himself, so I assume every once in a while he lays off. But it feels like whenever you see a shot of the Leafs bench, Craig Berube is just working his way through a mound of gum.
From Totally Offside, you have a chance to gain teleportation abilities. You can transport yourself plus anything you're wearing, carrying in a small backpack. But in exchange, your sense of taste is randomized for a week anytime you use your power. For example, toast tastes like pickles, steak tastes like dirt. Do you do it? It was right up there for weirdest questions.
That is up there. I mean, I'm just thinking, do you really have a need to teleport yourself? You can get on a plane and go most anywhere you got to go.
Yeah, but that costs money.
Oh, I see. I don't think I do it. Honestly, I don't like the idea of steak maybe tasting like dirt.
Food tastes too good.
Would you do it?
No, food tastes too good. That's exactly why I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
Could you imagine you transport yourself to the Caribbean and you expect the food to taste great, and then all of a sudden you're just eating.
Yeah, it feels like the trade-off is too high. Because as I look at it now, I feel like I can anywhere I really want to go that badly. I can get there on my own, and then I know I can get there and eat all the yummy food, and I know what it's going to taste like.
That's big money CJ talking with that answer. I love that.
Well, I mean, I've been a lucky guy. I've traveled a lot. It's not like I'm looking to go anywhere either, really. I mean, but.
So we both say no. Michael, the Sabres look like they're going to be around 85 points again while having $7.79 million in cap space in an alleged all-in year. Is their refusal to spend to the cap an ownership mandate, or is it exactly what GM Kevin Adams claims, managing future cap availability to afford extensions for JJ Peterka, Bowen Byram, etc.?
I have no reason to believe it's an ownership mandate. Everyone's got a boss, but the Sabres have not been a team that have been shy about spending. If you look historically, since the Pagula family has run the team. And so, I acknowledge it's a little bit of a weird look. Optically, it's not the best look, but it does also open up opportunities for them to make improvements or trades in season. So, everyone has a boss. I would say it's not wise to spend just for the sake of spending if you're in Kevin Adams' shoes, because you have to answer for those decisions. But it would not also surprise me to see them get closer to the cap by the end of the season to take on other salaries, other players that allow them to do so. I mean, flexibility is the name of the game in this sport, and not enough of the teams that would like to have flexibility have it. And so let's see where things go over time. I mean, I guess I'm not going to react to one season and say oh, wow, they're getting cheap. Because as I mentioned, the Sabres haven't won a lot of games over the last 12 years, but I can't say they've been cheap. I mean, they've made big trades. They've given out big contracts. Jack Eichel's last deal was given out while he was a member of the Sabres, $10 million a year. They've shown a willingness to spend. I think they have to find the right things to spend it on.
From Umoja. In your career covering hockey, what has been your biggest I was wrong change in perspective?
I wish I'd have thought about this one ahead of time.
You don't want these questions known ahead of time.
No, I know, but then one like this, because I actually want to give a good answer, because I know I've been wrong about lots of things, but I'm trying to think of what was my coldest take? What was I most wrong about?
Umoja brought up an example for themselves. For example, for myself, I used to undervalue the idea of dog in quotation marks. And now after the last couple of years, I put a significant amount of weight on certain guys just having the juice or having that dog in them.
Right. It's like the idea, they didn't want to be someone who just measured intangible. They figure intangibles can't be measured, so they undervalued it. Yes. I mean, that's a good answer. I heard even Alex Anthopoulos, so the former Blue Jays GM, current Atlanta Braves GM, but he mentioned that's one thing that he shifted his ideology on, is that there's a sort of idea of building a winning team, players with winning culture. I can't think of one thing though.
I do think you're right. It is a good answer. It's funny. a lot of GMs get groaned at for acquiring those like culture guys, but like I see the value for some of them, especially just how they might lift up players or how some guys like gravitate towards them. Like think of I bring him up a lot, but like think of a guy like Ryan Lomberg and what he might have meant to the Florida Panthers locker room last year as an example, right? Like,
right. Well,
he's a good.
The thing is, I've always like I never got down on those type of players though myself. Like, and here, like I was never against analytics. Like when it was first introduced, when we had like the analytics wars, like 10 or 11 years ago, a long time ago now. But I was never against them. You know, I had to learn some of the concepts. I wasn't on the cutting edge of it by any stretch. But I was never out there going like, this is nonsense, this Corsi Hockey League or whatever. Like I wasn't doing that. But I also have understood pretty intuitively, having been around NHL dressing rooms for a long time, that these are real people. Like there's a human aspect to this. There's a dynamic there that it isn't just measuring, you know, there's both sides of the coin. We're pretty complex beings in a sense, right? Man, I don't know that I don't have a good answer, honestly, but I've definitely been wrong about things. I'm not claiming to have a perfect record. You could probably, I mean, look, I wrote last year after the Leafs lost game 4 of their series to Boston. We're down 3-1. This is the end of the Maple Leafs as we know them. I think that was the headline, some version of that. Yeah. Just thinking that was the game where, you know, you saw the players, you know, Nylander and Marner and Matthews sort of getting into it on the bench. They fell behind 3-1 in that series with that loss. You know, it just felt like to me at the time, there's no way they're running it back, and they kind of ran it back. So, I mean, obviously a lot of changes made. They ended up firing Sheldon Keefe, changed the captaincy from Tavares to Matthews, rebuilt the blue line. But, you know, I was thinking that was going to, you know, just heading into a year where Marner and Tavares were, you know, entering a UFA season, which is they can do after the summer. I thought a bigger change was going to be made, and I was wrong. So that's a recent time I was wrong.
I mean, I still think you might ultimately end up being right. I still think you might end up being right with that personally, but
it's just what it felt on the night, right? Like I wasn't doing it. Obviously that screams a little bit alarm value, but it was not so much about being alarming. It was just sort of saying, this is the 8th year in a row that this team has been in the playoffs, and it's just going down in such familiar fashion. They're losing, and you know, again, they lost another series where, you know, a team that has all this money tied up in their top forwards, you know, isn't scoring enough, is struggling on the power play, all those types of things. I thought it was going to force a bigger change. Now, it wasn't what I was suggesting, but they did make a change. Like they invested all of their resources in the summer, essentially into the blue line and goaltending. You know, granted they were semi-limited resources, but they did put an emphasis on a different part of the roster than they had, I'd say. Anyway, it still wasn't the right take.
It's also still not worse than mine. I thought Jonathan Drouin was going to be a better player than Nathan McKinnon in his draft year.
Did you like say that at the time?
I tweeted that out like years ago. Like,
did you since delete the tweet, or is it somewhere deep in the annals?
It might still. I think it's probably still out there. I've owned up to it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, look.
Why not?
I'm not. Here's the thing. I'm not saying Nathan McKinnon was going to be a bad player. It's just Jonathan Drouin showed so much game-breaking ability as a junior player that I thought, you know what? Like, he might end up being the guy. And he's still an NHL player. It's just he never matched the level that Nathan McKinnon is at. And on top of that, Nathan McKinnon has since become one of my favorite players to watch. I like Nathan. Again, I think one of my most, but still, like Jonathan Drouin, just what he showed in junior, I thought, you know what, this guy might be can't miss. He had a goal in junior where he deked out pretty much an entire team before scoring. Like he had it in him. Again, still an NHL player, but that's probably like the most strong I've ever been.
MVP caliber.
Yeah, no way. No chance. Still an NHL player. Good for him. He's been able to carve out a career for himself. But, I mean, Nate Dogg is a dog for a reason.
Every opinion, the problem with it is it can be invalidated. And so some of our opinions get invalidated with time.
Yep, that is true. Anyway, thanks so much for tapping in, everybody. This concludes another edition of the CJ Show. We get closer and closer to episode 300 of our great show. Great work as always, Siege.
Same to you, brother. And happy Christmas season now that we're into December. You can dust off your vinyl back there. I'm glad to see you're joining me on the tunes.
Yeah, it's a slow grind for me. It's a slow grind upward for me with Christmas. I love Christmas. It's just anyway. I don't need to go.
Have you started any shopping yet?
Yeah, I started ordering some Christmas presents for Black Friday. It's Cyber Monday as we're recording this. I'll probably continue to do some more. I got some gifts already. I've bought some gifts.
Okay, so you're maybe not fully in the spirit yet, but you're starting to get your mind around the fact that it's really going to happen.
I'm preparing. I also have more incentive this year to get into the Christmas spirit earlier because I'm going to be at the World Juniors this year, so my Christmas time is going to be very short, essentially.
Right.
So I have more incentive to get into the spirit earlier than I normally would.
I love that. Let's bring the good vibes. Let's bring the good vibes for the next few weeks.
Oh, we will. We will. This is a Christmas-friendly podcast, the CJ Show. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a like and rating if you can, and we'll be back on Thursday with a brand spanking new episode. Thanks, guys. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.